Jen Myers is back on the podcast. Jen, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today for this topic.
Yeah, me too. I remember during our last conversation when you had brought it up, and I honestly don't remember if you brought it up while we were recording or before or after we were recording while we were chatting. Either way, I think that when you brought it up, it kind of piqued my attention, my interest, and I knew that this was going to be something I would want to follow up with you on. So, looking forward to diving in. For new listeners who don't know Jen, she's a broker with Premier Property Group in near the Portland, Oregon area. Is that
hmm
correct, Jen?
That's correct.
And she's a certified divorce real estate expert. And we talked about that back in episode 17 of the podcast. So, again, welcome back. The topic today is CMA,
hmm
comparative market analysis, the importance of it, and your strategy. You had mentioned the last time we talked that that was something that you had kind of uh, dove into really well and had become very proficient with the CMA. And I just I had to get you back on here to share some tips and advice. So uh, before we um, before we dive into the strategy and the technique and the process of performing an accurate CMA, shed a little bit of the light on the importance of the CMA.
I mean, our CMAs are what determine the fair market value for a property, and they're what we use to coach our home sellers on the best route for them to get their property sold. And there's so many factors that we have to take into consideration as we're prepping these, and they are essentially what lays the groundwork for you to have a successful transaction with your client. Because the more transparent and researched and ready to talk to your client you are about the numbers and what's happening in the market around them, the more prepped they are, the more coachable they are. So it's the heart of your transaction.
I think it's also important to note that it's not only is it very important to know this going into a listing appointment and to serve your listing clients, your seller clients, but
Mhm.
also to be able to support and assist your buyer clients as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Your buyer clients are going to ask you, am I overpaying for this house? I mean, 9 times out of 10, they want to know if they're getting a good deal, if the market supports the value that they're paying. It is your job to be able to run those numbers and help coach them on writing an acceptable offer based on what the market conditions are doing.
We're seeing some listings here in the Lake Norman area that have really raised some eyebrows. You know, that it's been Charlotte and especially the Lake Norman area has been a fairly hot market the last few years and or the last decade or so, and some new properties that have listed in the past few months have, if they sell at these prices, they're going to be record setters.
hmm
And they've really kind of raised some eyebrows. And the first question brokers always ask here locally when we're just chatting about these listings is, where did they get their numbers? Where did they get the price?
Yeah.
And how do you justify it? So I think it's really, yeah, I mean, it's really important. And I've also known, CMA is something that you don't want to be within 10%. You want to be a lot closer than that. I mean, 10% is a big deal. You want to be as accurate and as close to that justifiable figure as possible. So I would I would love for you to share a little bit of the story about how you were introduced to the process in your career and who kind of coached you on that and how did that begin?
So, just to touch on what you were just talking about, our job as real estate agents is to sell the home twice. We have to sell it to the buyer and we have to sell it to the appraiser.
Mm.
So, in those instances where we have those outlier properties that are priced so much higher or could, dramatically change the pricing in a neighborhood, you have to be prepared to stand up to the appraiser and present them the supporting information that justifies that home's value. And there's different ways that you can do that. But you talking about that just made me think about how, we do have two groups of really important people that we're selling it to make it work. Um, but I I didn't receive a ton of formal training on creating CMAs. I received some basic training when I started in real estate, which was, back when the market was crashing back in 2009. And what actually gave me a lot of my training was in order to get by during that time, because everything was short sales and bank owned properties, and it could take something a year to close, and everyone was broke. If you were in real estate, you were broke. So I actually signed up with a program to do broker price opinions, which are really common valuation tools for financial institutions to value properties. They would use them to determine, if a home was going to be in a short sale, they would use them to determine value at that time. Or if someone was seeking loan forgiveness for something, they could use those to kind of help justify the value. And I did hundreds of those. And the reason that they worked so well is because their program that I had to enter information on had a very specific formula. And it turned out that a lot of that formula was some of the criteria that appraisers would kind of use to bracket properties. And if I didn't do it just right, it got kicked back to me and I had to make corrections. So I got really good and really specific with how I was running those numbers because to start, I had a program training me on exactly what it was looking for on how to comp out properties. And it was a really successful formula for me going forward as a real estate agent comping properties to the point where I was made head agent on a team because the very experienced lead broker and I comp properties out the same. And it's how I comp them out today. I'm going to share some of the criteria with you guys because I think it will be really helpful as you're working on learning how to bracket your properties that you're comping.
Having a really well thought out process and a formula really that is so important to, it really takes a lot of the subjectivity out of the process. And for for not just for listeners, but for me too, there's a subtle difference between broker price opinion and comparative market analysis. Can you illustrate that a little bit?
Can. So a broker price opinion is like in between a comparative a market analysis and an appraisal. Like I am not a licensed appraiser, and so I am not qualified to do that job. But what they are looking for is more of an exact value for a home. A comparative market analysis is going to take into consideration not only active and sold comparables around the property, but what market conditions are doing, days on market, how many price reductions properties around that property are taking. You have to weigh all of those factors in a comparative market analysis because in a real estate transaction, a home is worth what a willing seller and a willing buyer are going to sell and purchase for. And there's a lot of factors that go into that more than just a very strict valuation.
I'm glad you were able to illustrate that because I haven't been able to do that myself. So that's excellent. Thank you for sharing. And
Yeah.
I'm going to actually re-listen to this a few times so that I can answer that question very quickly when it comes up. That was awesome. So let's talk a little bit about the steps of producing an excellent and accurate CMA.
Yeah, so I have some bullet points that I'm going to take people through in case they're taking notes or want to re listen to this as they're running a market analysis for themselves. There are several factors that I take into consideration. Before I do a market analysis, I have a conversation over the phone with the home seller so that I can get some general information about the property. Because before I had that conversation, I've pulled the tax record on the property to get an idea of how many bedrooms there are, the square footage of the home, where the home is. And that's not always accurate with what the home seller is going to tell you because maybe they did a remodel. So I have a conversation with the home seller to collect basic information about the home. I do want to know what they think the size is, how many bedrooms, what updates that they've done that are cosmetic, and what updates that they've done to the systems of the home. And systems of the home include the roof, the HVAC system, the hot water heater. Anything like that's really important for you to know as you're weighing how you're going to comp out the property. Once I have that information, I conduct or I put together the report. I start with the subject properties information. The first thing you're going to want to know is the square footage, because as you're searching for properties around the home, which I try to keep it a mile radius of the home, anything beyond that is a little bit more difficult to support. You really want to try to stay within a mile radius. This past year, agents are having to search outside of that just because we have less sales comps because sales numbers have been down. And with the square footage, I keep it within a 15% range. So I go 15% up and 15% down to bracket the square footage of the property. And I think that's really important because it keeps you from going too big or too small. And it gives you a nice solid foundation to be able to bracket the property in case you have to justify your report to the appraiser. You're going to want to know the property's lot size. Are you comping out acreage property, or are you comping out a new construction home that's on a tiny lot? How big can you go within that range? For a lot of these homes in my area that were built in the 90s and 2000s, we're under a quarter acre for all of our lots. So I really try to make sure that I'm staying within a very similar lot size because, of course, acreage property is going to sell for a lot more. You're going to want to know the bath and bedroom count. If I have a home that is 2 bathrooms, I'll go 1.5 bathrooms up to 3 bathrooms. Bedroom count, if I have a 3 bedroom home, I don't usually use 2 bedroom homes. I'll try to keep 3 to 4 bedrooms because you'll see in trends that 2 bedroom homes sell very differently than a 3 bedroom home. Most people are looking for a 3 bedroom home anytime they're searching. And it's the same if I have a 2 bedroom home that I'm selling. I don't use 3 bedroom homes to comp it out because people are going to pay more for a 3 bedroom home than they are for a 2 bedroom home. Age is the next one. So age of the home, I try to keep it within a 10-year radius. So if I have a 1980 home, I'll go up to 1990 and down to 1970 so that it brackets the value in that. So it's really specific how I run numbers. And if I'm not finding enough comps, I'll wiggle room those a little bit, but for the most part, that formula works really well. And then once I have my comparable list, I take a look at each one and I take a look at active properties and I take a look at sold properties and I take a look at what homes have updates similar to mine and what homes have maybe just a few updates because I use those to bracket the high and low end of each property. You really want to have higher bracketing comps and lower bracketing comps. Active homes will tell you what's selling in that area. So if you have 3 active homes that pop up and they're all tanking the price and they don't have as many updates as you can use that information to help take a look at pricing and decide if you're going to be pricing above them or around them so that you can be competitive with the comps that are active on the market too. I know that's a lot of information. Do you have questions about that?
More than we have time for today, but no, that was excellent. I love how the concept of bracketing, the formula that you use. It makes it very easy to follow, very easy to stay organized with your comparative market analysis, and when you're comping homes,
Mm-hmm.
the plus and minus 15% size makes a lot of sense too, as far as like square footage.
Yeah.
And to your point, yeah, a 2 bedroom home sells way differently than a 3 or 4 bedroom home, so or even a 3 bedroom. So it does make sense to eliminate that if you're looking for comparables to a 3 bedroom place. Probably stick to 3 bedroom and 4 bedroom,
Yeah.
and then also the flip side for a 2 bedroom home. Probably don't want to really. You probably want to find as many 2 bedrooms as you can to
Yeah.
compare that home to, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you're going to take that information and you're going to weigh it with, I always weigh mine with a market trend report.
Yeah.
You really want to know the area and the school districts of the property that you're selling and you want to know what the market trends are doing. Um, and an example of why this is important is I'm selling a home in Portland, and when it originally went on the market, it comped out beautifully with exactly what was happening with our markets. Properties were moving. We knew the average sales price of the homes that were similar to it, and it went pending within the first month. But then it had a sale fail, and it had been pending for a long enough period of time that we were hitting back into October, and our market was very stale in the Portland area in October. And so it's important to understand those market trends, because when a property is coming back on the market or you're running comps, you need to know where like the dead zones are in your market, because that's going to determine how you price a property. You need to know average days on market so that you know if you're starting to hit that time frame, might mean that you're priced a little bit too high. And you need to know if properties around the area are taking price reductions. And if so, how soon did they go pending after they took their price reductions? So you have to weigh all of those factors as you're looking at the sales comps and active comps to decide where you're going to be recommending the price ranges for the property.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and worth underscoring too. The importance of making sure that your comps are also in similar style neighborhoods, similar school districts, that sort of thing. All those sort of intangibles that aren't listed on, aren't the hard numbers, but and then what those markets are doing, what the market trends are. That
Mhm.
market trends have been kind of a hot topic for me lately because we've definitely seen, you know, homes are still moving. We still have a lot of people moving to the area. We're business is still pretty robust here locally, but our average days on market are twice what they were last year.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, we see it definitely changing. Slowly but surely, but. So that's important too. Definitely, it's there's a lot of properties that we could list today that aren't going to get the same prices that they were in
Mhm.
2022 and
Yeah.
2021.
Oh yeah, 2022, that was a special market. And
Yeah.
it's your job to be coaching your client on what these market trends mean for them. I mean, homes in January in Oregon are going to sell really different than homes in May in Oregon. And if you have an acreage property, there's actually a really great time frame of when that should go on the market in our area. Like understanding how homes move differently is really important. And then comping out homes that are the same style is also really important. If you have a traditional two-story home, you're not going to use comparables of a 1929 home that is two-story but just a totally different style. You have to really pay attention to what those look like, because you want things to be similar for the report and similar for the appraisal.
So we're not just comparing the data, comparing the style
Hmm.
of the home. You mentioned earlier too the difference between cosmetic updates and
Hmm.
systems updates, which is also very important as well. Curb appeal, of course, is important, but so is relatively new HVAC
Yeah,
and water heater and that sort of thing. So,
and there's a
uh,
reason for that now. I mean, it was important previously, but it's really important right now because with interest rates still where they're at, over 6.5%, home buyers are taking the money that they used to have that would give them some flexibility in doing some cosmetic updates or repairs, and they're having to dump it into their down payment to make their mortgage payment manageable.
mhm.
And so there's less flexibility for them to be able to take on some of those repairs or those system updates. So if you have a home that's updated, it's going to sell much better for those home buyers because they don't have to use that money to go in and do those updates themselves.
That makes total sense. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that's happened here locally, I don't know if it's just a North Carolina thing or if it's national, but an insurance agent acquaintance colleague of mine was sharing recently that in North Carolina, a lot of insurance carriers won't insure a roof that's over 10 years old. So,
We're definitely experiencing a run on roofing for sure. And so that's one of the things that we're really coaching our clients on is, be prepared that this is something that you could be asked for if you haven't done it already.
right.
I just put one on the market in Bethany where we had to replace the roof before it could go on market because it was old enough and the condition was going to be difficult to pass. It's possible, but it's really going to depend on how strict the lender is. So there's options for that. You just want to make sure that you have a good conversation with your real estate agent about what to do.
So to recap a little bit, starting out with a conversation with the seller. If you're doing a comparative market analysis for a seller, the differences between those cosmetic updates, noting cosmetic updates and systems updates.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into the bracketing, the data, running the numbers, and uh, you know, uh, sizing the square footage, comparing, finding comparables within a mile radius, and not any further out than that, and then going up to plus or minus 15% in size. Bedroom comparables as well. Two bedroom can really skew the number compared
Mm-hmm.
to a three bedroom, and of course the age of the home, and then those market trends, those local market trends. We see that here in Charlotte. I'm sure you do in Portland as well. That there are value of a 4,000 square foot home. All things being equal, is going to be a lot different in certain areas of the county and around the metro area than in others. It could be the view, it could be the school system. So yeah, it's there's just so many variables. I love though that you like were able to just knock out those bullet points and just structure it. I'm a checklist guy. I do great if I have a checklist to follow. I do just fine. So that's the kind of thing that I love. Let's talk a little bit about some of the common mistakes that you see agents making when it comes to CMAs.
The biggest one is them not looking at the market trends. I think they think that it can just be the statistical data of what's selling, but it's not taking into consideration how the market might fluctuate in the next month, given the time of year. So, really understanding market trends is so important. And I think it's one of the biggest mistakes that I see. Um, I think the other thing that I see happen is we're in a market where we don't have as much inventory right now. And your job is to really sit down and really analyze data, statistical and market trend data. And if you're worried that a seller is going to want significantly more for their house, or you might not get the listing because you don't comp it out within a certain range, I think that that's a really big mistake. It's your job to be, completely ethical and honest with the pricing that you see, even if you think that it's not going to make the seller super excited, because your job is going to be to sit down with them and run that information with them and help them understand why the pricing that you're recommending is so important. You can have a seller interview four realtors and they're all going to give a slightly different price range based off of what they're running, but don't let your nervousness that you might not get the listing impede you from running the report that you really need to run for that client.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be very tempting, right? In an effort to win the listing and please the
Yeah.
client, to be uh, amiable or agreeable to a sales price that is going to be hard to justify.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I get that, and it's in our best interest too, especially the higher the value of the property, the more expensive it is for us to list and market that home. Sometimes it could be that way, and it's a great risk for us too as well. You don't want to take a listing that's overpriced, that's going to sit and not sell, and perhaps lose that contract could expire before you have a chance to sell the home, and you've invested so much money into marketing this home and time and effort and energy. So, yeah,
Yeah, you don't want an angry client either. If you
yeah,
tell them that their home is gonna sell for, 25,000 more than it actually comps out at, and they're calling you angry and, a month later saying, why am I not getting showings? It's not a good place for anybody to be. So, just, be be confident in what you're presenting that client because this is a really important part of your job and you know it. And if you come to the table and you can really sell them on why it's so important for them to price appropriately and here's why, then you're gonna be an example and a leader in our industry for home sales because your sales are gonna sell. People are gonna feel good about their transactions with you, and you're gonna have more business from it.
being able to really clearly explain and show and demonstrate how you came to these
Mm-hmm.
to this sale price figure is going to be so beneficial. I mean, the being able to justify it in a way that makes sense and to explain that process to the seller client is going to make them very happy. They're going to want to know that, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, it's probably a whole nother topic, but I can chat all day about what we do in our listing appointments that also helps drive home the why the value that I'm presenting to them um, is not only going to net them more in the long run, but like I show them the numbers. Like I have an active net sheet. We sit there and we plug and play and we talk about, what this means for them, which has been a huge hit in with clients. So
Absolutely. And it sounds like, is that going to be another podcast episode?
I would be happy to share my listing appointment strategy.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No? Understood. I get that. Yeah, I
Only
get
with
that.
people in North Carolina.
Yeah. What other advice would you have, Jen, for listeners who are kind of early in their journey here in the real estate industry? What other advice would you have off the top of your head?
Um, when you develop your market analysis, I would give a range. So if you have an idea of a good price point, give your clients a range. It's easier for them to make a no and kind of swallow the sorry, my dog's being
That's okay. That's all right.
swallow.
We're dog friendly. We're dog friendly here on Epic Agents
Very
Podcast.
friendly. No personal space. It's easier for them to feel like you're not just dictating to them what should happen. You feel more like a team if you're like, here's where I comp your property out at. Here's why. Here's kind of the range I would recommend. Where do you want to fall within that?
Hmm.
Because then they feel like they have more control over where they're coming in price point wise. So I'd really recommend a range, and I would really recommend if you're new to this, pick a property and start running comps and have an agent in your office take a look at your CMA and say, hey, here's what I would recommend, here's what I would do differently. Would they comp it out the same? The best way to get good at this is just doing it over and over and over again. And you'll be so glad that you did because you're just gonna, have a system for it and you're gonna be able to just feel really great with the skills that you've developed if you just practice it over and over again. So look for opportunities to use it.
Practice makes perfect, right?
Yeah.
One other thing that you just kind of alluded to that we didn't talk about earlier, and that is the motivation of the seller.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when you offer that range, that's a great way of determining the how how expedient the seller wants to be with this transaction. Are they patient or are they in a hurry to sell the home? So that I feel like offering that range is a good place to find out where in that range you're going to fall.
Yeah, motivation is so important. I mean, even in some of these transactions that we have that started out like with a really motivated seller and maybe they went pending right away, but then their circumstance changed and if the transaction falls apart, they go back on the market and their motivations change. Like always knowing the motivation of your clients is really important as you're looking at how to coach them on numbers.
Jen, this has been awesome. I'm so glad that we got to follow up and get you back on the podcast to talk about CMAs. This is awesome information. I'm going to also make the transcript available on the website as well for someone if someone wanted to just kind of highlight some areas and keep notes. for listeners who are new, go ahead and share with them how they can learn more about you and connect with you.
They can connect with me on social media. We have a Instagram page and Facebook page. If they have questions about CMAs, I would be happy to answer those. They're welcome to contact me directly. They can email me or shoot me a text message. All of our contact information is available, but social media is probably the easiest way to get in contact with us.
Perfect. I'll have those links, of course, in the description for this episode and show notes, and tag you as always on Instagram when we release this episode. And Jen, again, really appreciate it so much. Jen Myers, broker with Premier Property Group, Portland, Oregon. Jen, thanks for joining the podcast again.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.